This man was admitted to the Somerset and Bath Lunatic Asylum in 1905. His name was John Selman, and today I will tell you his story. He was born in 1849 in Bath, Somerset, to Francis Selman and Mary Merrill. His father was a gardener for some of the richest men in the area. In 1872 he married Clara Ellen Oaten in Uffculme, Devon. They had a son Thomas in 1874. He was followed by Robert in 1875 and James in 1878. The family lived in Bridewell Lane, Bath, and John worked as a compositor. The 1891 and 1901 census shows him in the Bath Union Workhouse, and on the 24th of December 1905, he was admitted to the Bath and Somerset Lunatic Asylum. The reason for admittance, mania. The report said he was thin and grey, eyes bluish, greyish bared, and reflexes sluggish in reaction. Mentally is wild and excited, talks continuously and incoherently, states he is an archangel sent from heaven to preach the gospel and insists on manna sent from heaven. December 25th, 1905, has only slept about 1 hour. He's been restless and excited, is convinced electric currents are working on him. December 27th, 1905, sleeping draught administered, slept about 5 hours, still persistently talks about electric currents, which wander about him and come out of his elbows. He is, however, less restless. December 31st, 1905, is the subject of mania. Says he is a prophet sent by God to teach the Gospels. Poor bodily health and condition. January 7th, 1906, remains about the same, is quieter and insists he is getting rid of the electric currents. January 14th, 1906, remains in bed, restless at times, rambling and incoherent in conversation, retains his delusions. January 21st, 1906, has been allowed up, restless and continuously changing his seat, and requires careful watching. February 14th, 1906, remains restless and demented, continually throwing his arms about and requires constant supervision, talks unintelligibly and incoherently, and has no knowledge of his surroundings. He says he has been fed with manna from heaven during the night, crawls about the floor and will not stay in bed, or keep his clothes on. Tied a piece of string tightly round his neck. February 22nd, 1906, tried to set himself on fire. He says he is an archangel sent by His Majesty the King to preach the gospel. December 13th, 1907, is vacant and dull and has a weakened intellect. He would be unable to make a living doing anything outside. He is very lost at times, moderate health. April 11th, 1908, he now works in the garden but has little mind or memory. He considers himself a young man about to start life, is silly and irrational. April 7th, 1909, he is somewhat depressed and does not take much interest in anything. Fair health. October 29th, 1909, he has relapsed, is in Ward 6, twists sheets around his neck and throws his bedclothes about, wanders about the room and will not stay in bed, destructive of his clothing and dirty in his habits. January 20th, 1910, had colitis but is progressing well. March 18th, 1910, he has been getting weaker, yesterday unable to swallow. Until then he had taken his food fairly well. March 20th, 1910, died today at 12:50 a.m. Cause of death, organic brain disease. He was aged 62. He was buried in an unmarked grave in the Mendip Hospital Cemetery. So rest in peace, John, you will be remembered. This man was sent to the lunatic asylum in 1887, and today I will tell you his story. Robert Baker was born in 1851 in Ghoulhampton, Somerset. He was the younger of two sons born to William Baker and Mary Mitchington. The family spent their whole lives living in Ghoulhampton, where his father worked as an agricultural labourer. He was admitted to the Somerset and Bath Lunatic Asylum on the 5th of March 1887. On admittance, his report said he is very rambling and talks in a religious strain. His answers to questions are largely irrelevant and he cannot recall much about himself. Previously a patient here in 1873 and discharged recovered. He is quiet but has delusions. He says he has a wife and family, but this is not true. Bodily health is delicate and he is losing weight. March 1900, he potters about the grounds with a sweeping brush and is talkative but rambling. December 1901, he works in the dining hall when it is too cold or wet for him to go outside. October 1906, he works at the front of the building with a sweeping brush. At times he is noisy and abusive. and says he is the public executioner. November 1907, still sweeps the front drive and says he is a paid workman, and he tells the confused story of a little man telling him to sweep a road, which is why he came here. July 1st, 1908, he still works at sweeping the carriage drive at the front of the building. His health is not satisfactory and he suffers periodically from bronchitis. October 1908, he claims ownership of all the horses that come up the drive. Whilst working on sweeping the front drive, he talks incoherently and shouts and gestures. April 1909, he now collects rubbish in the grounds and is in fair health. He gets very excited and threatening at times, but is never violent. He calls me young Mr. So-and-so. July 1910. He now works in the gardens as he's made too much noise, keeping the drive clean with his shouting and gesticulations. July 1912. Rambles incoherently, chatters away to imaginary people. Works in the garden. Does not know his name or where he is. October 1914. He is now quite incoherent, but quieter and still works in the garden under supervision. He has a bronchitic chest and is ill at times. March 12, 1915. He was taken ill this morning and put to bed, gradually getting worse and moved to infirmary, on milk diet. March 23, 1915. He died this morning at 3:35 a.m., aged 64 years, in the presence of Jacob Cook, night attendant. Cause of death, tuberculosis of the lungs. He is buried in an unmarked grave at the Mendip Hospital Cemetery. So rest in peace, Robert. You will be remembered. This woman was admitted to the lunatic asylum in 1898, and today I will tell you her story. Emma Callow was born in 1838 in Hanham, Bristol, to Charles Callow and Mary Hawkins. In 1863 she married James Frederick Page, a flyman from Bath, Somerset. In 1871 the family lived at Mile End Cottage in Walcott, Bath. They had one son, Alfred, who was aged 3. They had already had a daughter, Alice, who was born in 1864, who was staying with relatives, and a daughter, Lillian, who was known as Lila, born in 1872. It seems life became difficult for Emma, as she was admitted to the Somerset and Bath Lunatic Asylum in 1877. Over the next 20 years, she was discharged and readmitted. On admittance in 1898, it said she was suffering from mania, caused by intemperance. On admittance, she was quiet and well behaved, but she can be very irritable and irrational at times. Her notes state that she thinks she is in a bank, is quite incoherent and cannot give any account of herself. She was described as obstinate and abusive if crossed, and seldom smiles but looks vexed and out of temper. In 1902 the doctor records that she is in the main a surly, bad-tempered old woman. She abuses me if I persevere in talking to her. She also tells me that she pays me by the week to look after her, that she herself manages kings and queens, and repeatedly tells me that her name is not Page but Valentine. In 1905 it is recorded that she remains mentally and bodily the same, but as before insists on being called Valentine. The notes tells us that the patient was suffering from mania on admission. She improved somewhat and then became morose and sullen and then developed grand delusions. She thinks she pays all the wages here, becomes abusive if called by a given name, Emma Page, insists she is called Valentine. Pompous old lady, dignified and exalted. October 24th, 1908. It was noticed that she had become a bit queer tonight, and the night nurse had been advised to observe her. When the day nurse came to get her up, she was cold and appeared much more confused. She kept drawing her knees up to her stomach. Stimulants were given, but she is restless and moved to a lower bedstead. Dr. Stevens Pope was called for at 11:30 p.m. as her condition worsened and she died at 12:30 a.m. Cause of death, senile decay. Died on October 25, 1908, aged 70, in the presence of Annie Singleton, night nurse. She is buried in an unmarked grave at the Mendip Hospital Cemetery. So rest in peace, Emma, you will be remembered. This man was admitted to the Somerset and Bath Lunatic Asylum in 1898, and today I will tell you his story. William Hopkins was born in 1830 in Bath, Somerset. William and his father and 2 brothers were all shoemakers, and the family lived in Bedford Street. In 1854 he married Hannah Monk. By now William was working as a lamplighter for the gas company, and in 1877 they had a son named Frederick. Tragedy would strike the family in 1885, as his wife passed away at age 54. In 1888 he married Ada Marion Lane, but just 10 months after the marriage he summoned his wife for assaulting him. Ada, who was 36 years younger than William, had been spending all of her money on drink. On the day in question, when he returned to the house, she had smashed all the plates and glasses. She had openly admitted she intended to make his life miserable. William did not want her punished, but said he needed protection. She was bound over to keep the peace for 6 months, and to pay the costs of the court. The 1891 census shows the couple living separately. William was admitted to the asylum in July 1898. On admittance, he thought the clock on the wall in the sick room was his son, and he called out to it. William had suffered with epilepsy for years, and was put in the Bath Union workhouse due to his mental condition. His notes say he seems rather demented rather than maniacal. He was noted as being quiet and contented with good physical health. A cheery-looking, well-nourished man, though seems quite deaf. When he does converse, it is in a silly, chatty way, but he becomes incoherent if questioned in any way. In early October 1899, he suffered from a series of epileptic fits. On October 23rd, he had 2 severe epileptic fits, but between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. he had 7 fits, and between 11 p.m. and 12 a.m. he had 15, with the intervals in between becoming shorter and shorter, and he died at 12:08 a.m. on October 24th. Cause of death: epileptic decay. He was buried in an unmarked grave at the Mendip Hospital Cemetery. So rest in peace, William. You will be remembered.